as an observer.
If soft, it's okay.
I think, Shamim, you ask a question which I want to rephrase and probably say, how hard do journalists find it to report the story of election? Does that capture the thought you had in your mind?
It does capture it, but I want you to address yourself to, if in any way you were part of those that observed the Kawempe elections.
Yes.
If you were able to see what
I did,
what happened, particularly yes, at one of the polling stations at Kawempe Mbogo, where the Isanos were picked from, and the other colleagues, you as an observer, as a person that understands the law and understands what we are supposed to do, how hard do you find it to see us go through that
position?
Yes.
Of course, it's disheartening for me to see journalists beaten in elections, because you see, elections are not supposed to be war. Every time there is violence in elections, then the process is compromised. Then the integrity of the election cannot be spoken about. Then you cannot even report about that election. And most of the information that election observers and the world depends on concerning an election comes through journalists. So if the journalists cannot report the story, then there is no election. Without a journalist, there is no election. Without them doing their work, without them looking behind the scenes to see how is the process arranged, who is participating in the process, highlighting the issues that are happening in that election, then that election is no election. And I will try to contextualize a lot of these things using data. That Ugandans speak 80% of information from radio. And they take 14% of information from social media. Newspapers, 12%. And this is the Afrobarometer data that was produced before we did the 2021 election. The statistics have not changed significantly. They are lying in between there. The internet, 13%. But why do we talk about the media then? Because you see, I'm talking about 80% of information reaching rural and urban areas. For example, if I asked my brother Julius, he's here from the Electoral Commission, how many people will be at each polling station in the rural areas? How many people have been aligned to be in each polling station in the rural areas? And how many are going to be at each polling station in the urban areas? I'm a journalist. And so I'm saying, I'm talking about this as a journalist. I need this information to know it. Why? Because numbers matter in an election. The law matters, but numbers matter. Because the numbers will reflect what exactly happened. If the journalist cannot see the connection between the result at the polling station and the national tally center, then there is no connection with the election altogether. If the data that the journalist has picked at the polling station is not being reflected at the national tally center, there is a problem with the election. And the person helping us to understand that transition between the polling station and the national tally center will be a journalist. I will go and give you a clear example of Kayunga. In Kayunga, there was an election. There's a woman who was called Nakwede. She belonged to the political party of Joel Senyonyi. She knows what she went through. A number of the DR forms she had from the polling station had no connection to what my friend Julius was reading at the National Tally Center. Now, if a journalist is to report that story, how do you begin to report? The story would be, at the polling station, the number of voters were 500. Those who polled were 446. But at the National Tally Center, it is 1,860 who polled at a particular polling station. Now, I will give you more examples from 20. You're going to respond, Julius, don't worry. From 2021. In 2021, I'm giving specific examples. And these stories tallied with what the observers saw. So the observers were at polling stations and discovered that the wrong ballots had been delivered at Nalukolongo TC polling station. The polling station was called Bulwa polling station in Wakaliga. And Electoral Commission was alerted that the ballots that had been delivered to Nalukolongo TC at Balua polling station were not the right ballots. So the Electoral Commission went back to look for the correct ballots and bring them. But if the media and the observers had not been at that polling station to see what was happening, then probably the election would have gone ahead with the wrong ballots at the wrong polling station. I'll give a second example. In Nebi, Madi, Okolo, in West Nile polling station, officials delivered the wrong ballot papers for the election of councillors. The right ballots were only delivered much later, after the journalists had reported the story and the observers had highlighted the issue to the Electoral Commission. At Nkozi sub-county in Mpigi district, elections were suspended. Why? The journalists and observers said the symbols for the candidates and the names and the pictures had been mixed up by the Electoral Commission in printing of the ballots. Do these things happen? They do happen. Will they happen in 2026? I can guarantee they will. But so how do you tell that story? Until you tell that story, and until the data is captured, many years later, you would have forgotten. So the role of the journalist cannot be more emphasized when an election is taking place in terms of promoting transparency, integrity, fairness, and credibility of an electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charity Ahimbisibwe.